Hey there! Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I am Shaniadiy and I am a self-taught seamstress showing how I make my own clothes. Today I'll be sharing how I would go about making this dress that I found on Shein. And just a quick disclaimer to the trolls, I know there's probably a better, more professional, more legitimate way to go about making this dress, but this is how I would go about making it. So
if you don't like it, you could leave.
So let's talk materials. I would use stretchy black fabric and probably something that has a bit of weight to it so that it can kind of like suck me in. And 2 buttons, of course, and then a sewing machine and a buttonhole foot. And yeah, I think that's it. So when I'm making clothes, I try to understand what the anatomy of the garment is. So basically, like, what are the pieces that put together create this final garment. Looking at this dress, the pieces are 1 and 2, which is the straps. We have this. I'm trying to draw as neatly as I can without covering like the actual garment. So that is called, well, I don't know what it's called, but I'm gonna call it the cami, and you'll understand why later. Part of the cami is this right here, and that is the placket, more specifically the button placket. And then after that is basically the skirt, right? And it's not just any kind of skirt, but it's a mermaid skirt. So those are the 4 basic pieces of this dress. So when we look at the straps, they look like pretty basic straps from the front anyway. But when you look at the back of the straps, you'll notice that it's adjustable, and it's adjustable by the use of, or with the use of, buttonholes. It's always easy to cut things down as opposed to having to add more fabric. So I would make my straps like super long, and then I would add 3 buttonholes. I'm gonna make another video about everything related to buttons and buttonholes and sewing them. So if you want a more detailed like explanation of how to go about the buttonholes, then you should check out that video. All right, so the next thing we have is what I'm calling the cami. So the reason why I'm calling this part the cami is because it, to me anyway, it basically looks like a camisole top. Like, you know, like a basic spaghetti strap top. And the only difference is that instead of it being like on top of the breast, it's underneath it. That's how I think of it. There's basically 2 options that I would consider when going about making this part of the dress.
So how do you want to do this?
One way is like the from scratch way, and then one way is kind of like an upcycled way, if you will. If I wanted to do it from scratch, things are falling. If I wanted to do it from scratch, I would take my fabric, I would fold it in half, and then I would take the camisole top and I would fold that in half and put it on the fabric and trace it, and then basically make a pattern from there. The other option, which is the upcycle option, is to take an already existing camisole. I would take off the straps with like a seam ripper or maybe scissors. And then if the camisole isn't already a cropped camisole, I would crop it. So if you're considering using option 2 to make this dress, I have a tutorial where I took a camisole top and I turned it into a corset. And basically the steps that I took in that video is the same thing that I would do in order to make the cami part of this dress. The only catch about doing it this way is that I would really have to make sure that the camisole fabric is going to match the skirt fabric, because once they get stitched together, you don't want to have like different shades of black or like different texture. Like, it has to be seamless, and I think that that could be a little tricky. So I think between the 2 options, I would probably just make it from scratch, and that way I can be sure that the fabric I'm using to make the cami part of the dress is the same fabric that I'm using to make the skirt part of the dress. But it's up to you how you want to approach it. I I don't think that it's supposed to be like an actual button placket where it works, where you can open it. What I would do is I would just create like a sort of tube, and then I would cut it so that it's the same length of the cami, and then I would put 2 buttons on it, and then I would take that fake placket and stitch it onto the front center of the cami. So I would go about it that way. For the skirt part of the dress, the first option, the from scratch way, is a little bit more complex because it would require taking your measurements. So I would take my waist measurement, my hips, the measurement around my knees, the measurement from wherever the top of the skirt is going to be, from that top point down to my hip, and then I would take another measurement from my hip down to my knees, and then I would take another measurement the length of my knees down to the bottom of where I want the dress to end. And with all of those measurements, I would then make a pattern from scratch. That way is a bit more complicated, so I honestly don't think I would do it that way. So doing it the second way, I would take a skirt that I already have, and ideally that skirt should have the same amount of stretch as the fabric that I'm going to be using for my final dress. So I would take that skirt and I would fold it in half. I would also take my fabric and fold it in half, and I would take my folded skirt and put it on top of my fabric and basically trace my skirt. Now, if my skirt is short, then I would make it long to the length of my knees, and then I would flare it out from where my knees are, flare it out to create that like mermaid shape. If my skirt is already long, let's say it's like a long maxi skirt, then I would still trace the whole thing. I would mark where the knees are, and then from that knee mark, I would then flare it out to create that maxi style hem. Like I said, the second option is much more simple and much more straightforward. You just have to make sure that it's the same amount of stretch between the skirt that you're tracing and the fabric that you're using, because what could happen is that the pattern that you end up making could end up being too big or too small. For order of operations, in terms of how to actually construct all of the pieces, let's say you made all these pieces and then you're wondering what's next.
What now? What do I do?
So what I would do to put it all together is I would sew the skirt to the cami, and then once I have the cami and the skirt together, I would then attach the straps, and literally that is it. I know it sounds super like high level in terms of detail.
Where are the details?
If you have any questions and there's anything that you're wondering about, definitely leave a comment. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you want to see me make this dress, then leave a comment below. I will actually take the time to make it so you guys can see a more in-depth tutorial or sew along, if you will, but that's if you want it.